Welcome to the Anthony T. Horror Show here on the Doc Discussions Network. This is Anthony T. First off, I want to let you know this is my first podcast ever, because for years I've been primarily blogging on filmarcade.net and blogging on the Anthony T's Horror Chamber, as I also have a horror site too. The reason I'm expanding into podcasting is I want to do interviews. I want to interview horror directors, actors, and so on. But I also want to explore other things horror, like comics or even wrestling. It depends what I can find out, obviously. I will also have convention shows here. Those will usually be a half-hour show, since I don't want to go too much into talking about conventions. But I'll primarily be a preview show of the convention, about who's coming to convention, plus also who I'm looking forward to seeing. You'll also get in the beginning a random thought, which I will have shortly, as that's been pre-taped through a voice recorder. That will probably be every episode, just to get things moving before I get to the interview process of the show. And speaking of interviews, I have an interview here with Philip Perron, which I'll get to once I get through my horror thoughts. As in the first edition of Horror Thoughts, I'm going to be talking about the Dread Central label. So, buckle up, listen to what I have to say about Dread Central, then I will get to my interview with Philip Perron. Welcome back to the Anthony T's Horror Show. This is a segment called Horror Thoughts, where I talk about my horror views and my views alone. Not anybody else's reviews, my views. Today I'm going to talk about Dread Central Presents. This is a label that's pretty much my favorite specialty label when it comes to indie horror films. They release some great films such as Director's Cut and #Screamers, but the three films I'm going to talk about are all films you should check out. First, The Lodgers. This film is a very creepy, very gothic film. It has a great story. The film has great direction. The cast does a very good job making sure the characters fit the story and are interesting enough to keep your attention. And the fact that this film also boasts great cinematography, which makes it feel like another character, because it captures this gothic feel that this film is going for. If you're a fan of The Witch, you will like this film. The next film I'm going to talk about is Terrifier. This film is in my top 5 of 2018 so far. This film is balls to the walls, gory. This film has some of the most creative kills that you would not expect to see in a slasher film. And this film has a very good lead performance from David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown, as I truly think Art the Clown has the chance to become the next Victor Crowley. Terrifier is definitely a film you should check out. It's definitely not for the squeamish. If you're not into these ultra gory films, then I suggest you not see this film. But if you want a slasher film that is filled with gore and shocking moments, this film is for you. And finally, I'm going to talk about the Kane Hodder story, To Hell and Back. Or actually, To Hell and Back, the Kane Hodder story. This film is easily the best film that I've seen all year. This film is heartbreaking. I have problems discussing this film sometimes because it just brings me back to some of the probably the most traumatic moment in that film. It's very good. It's structured very well. That it keeps you glued to this film. And of course, this film is definitely a film that generates emotion. If I literally almost cried watching this film, and I'm a person that doesn't cry very often. It really felt heartbreaking. I'm not going to tell you anymore because I want you to see this film so badly. If you're a horror fan, if you're not a horror fan, this is a film you definitely should check out. I truly think this is the best documentary that I've seen in the last 5-10 years. It's available on VOD. It's available on the Epic Pictures website for Blu-ray. Get this film, or at least rent it. This film is a great film, and it's going to be very hard for this film not to be the best film of 2018, because this film is something that leaves you with some emotion. Now back to the show. Welcome back to the Anthony T's Horror Show. I'm here with my guest, Philip Perron. He recently wrote a story in the Chud Anthology tribute book, Chud Lives. And he's also the host of Doc Discussions podcast, which is also our host site, too. So, what drew you to become both a podcaster and a writer?
Well, actually, I always wanted to write, but I didn't know what to do. I mean, nowadays, a lot of things is through connections and whatnot. So the original reason I started the podcast was because I wanted to write stories, horror stories, whatever, and I figured that the horror podcast or genre podcast would be a way to meet people, and to be truthful, that has actually worked, at least for the small press, meaning authors that are mostly writing for a smaller press that isn't necessarily the big companies like Random House and whatnot. Though I have met a few of those as well through the podcast, and so that was the main reason the podcast came into existence. And then the second reason the podcast came into existence was that I was watching horror films once a month with a buddy of mine, and I wanted to read reviews and stuff before I went to see the films. And then I found from a blog a link to a video podcast talking about the movie Cloverfield. And so I thought that was pretty cool. So I started looking around and saw that there was this online community that did reviews and talked and did critique on pretty much every subject, never mind horror movies. And I figured, hey, if me and my buddy go see a horror movie a month, we could do the same thing, because after what we used to do was go to Starbucks or McDonald's or some restaurant like a TGIF and just talk about the movie we just saw. And so I said, why don't we do that through a podcast, which is something I had found, like I said, about 8 years ago. And so that's how it started. So it was like a marketing tool for writing, or to meet other writers, and then also to do what I was doing anyway monthly, which was just talking about a horror film with a buddy of mine after seeing it.
Who else co-hosts the podcast with you?
There are actually 4 of us. Originally, it was 4 others, I mean. Originally, there was that one person that I mentioned. He did a few episodes at the very beginning, but his time commitment just didn't work. So I found other folks, and they are Mike Dunleavy out of New York State, Eric Webster out of Michigan, Arthur Christie Schoonover out of Connecticut, and Abe Spinney out of Massachusetts. And all of them are fairly new to podcasting, pretty much the same time I started. What happened was that Eric, co-host, he was actually forming another podcast at the same time as Dark Discussions called Ascancity, which talks about general interests. And he mentioned he wouldn't mind talking horror with me, so he joined. And then Mike I found through a blog. Basically, he sent audio files or audio emails to another horror podcast that is now defunct, and I heard him on those, and I thought he was good, so I contacted him through their blog. And then Christy joined us through writing an article for the podcast page. And then Abe, I had known earlier from a writer's group, and then I heard that he was doing a blog, and I started reading his blog, and I thought it was pretty good, and I saw that he was interested in anime, and so I brought him on board as maybe a diverse voice that talked about other things such as science fiction, anime, and things of that nature.
Did you ever think you guys would make it to 350 episodes?
That's a good question. I knew as long as the other folks didn't get bored or want to quit, the podcast could probably last, because once I get something going, I usually a creature of habit. So to produce and release an episode weekly just became a habit, something I had to do. I run a couple of fantasy baseball and football leagues, and that's a weekly thing and takes a lot of work, and this felt similar to that. So I figured as long as I had co-hosts, yes, I figured that we could do it. If it was me alone, which I did a few episodes early, just me alone, I think it would have been a little harder to get to 350, whether or not I'd be around 7 or 8 years later as I am now. I think I probably could be, just with not as many episodes had I done it as a solo cast.
There's also some other podcasts on your network. Can you fill us in on what else you can find on the Dark Discussions network?
Sure. The first spin-off was a podcast called You Know Nothing, Jon Snow, a Game of Thrones podcast. Basically, me and co-host Mike had noticed that The Walking Dead was having a lot of podcasts that were being noted and whatnot. And since we were watching Game of Thrones weekly, we had done a couple of wrap-out episodes on Dark Discussions, basically season-ending episodes. So what happened was I suggested maybe if folks wanted to do talk about weekly Game of Thrones, and Mike and Eric, who follow the show as much as I do, were on board. So that was the first, and that is in hiatus until the next season. Then we did Westworld, Westworld was a big show that came out on HBO, and we figured we'd jump on board prior to the glut of podcasts about the show came out. And that's called Bullets, Brothels, and Bots, a Westworld podcast. And we just wrapped up doing a season of that. Me and Mike do a dual co-host podcast called Searching for American Gods podcast, and that wrapped up last season, so that would be last year, and the next one is supposed to come out next year, and we're going to pick up there. And then I do a solo cast that I have about 9 episodes out of now called Halloween Boutique Psychotronic Reviews, where I do reviews of boutique labeled discs, basically things like Synapse, Severin, Scream Factory, a lot of stuff that you talk about on your YouTube channel. And the last episode I did was actually on LGBTQ month, which was in June, and the episode was being released just at the end of June, early July. So I decided to do a theme episode. And so what I did was review 7 films that had a lesbian theme. And unlike the usual movies that I do, which are midnight movies and horror films and whatnot, and a lot of those films obviously have lesbian themes thrown in. Since June is LGBTQ Pride Month, I figured that would be something I should be more serious about, so I chose 7 art house films and did that episode, and that just came out about, like I stated, 4 weeks ago. But my next episode will be more into genre films.
Will there be any more new shows on the network besides mine?
Actually, that's a good question. It really comes down to whether or not people want to do other things. There may be, though. This was the first announcement. Myself and Eric and possibly Mike are going to do a possibly monthly genre show on films that wouldn't necessarily fit with Dark Discussions podcast, but would still be films interesting to horror and genre fans. So, for example, Mission Impossible would be a type of film that a lot of people would be curious about that wouldn't necessarily fit into horror, sci-fi, or fantasy. So Eric suggested possibly doing a new podcast, and we may start that up in October or November, untitled at this point.
Okay. All right, let's now move on to your recent story in the Chud Anthology book, Chud Lives. How did you become involved with the project?
Well, a lot of things with smaller press is who you know more than anything, and that really counts, and that happens based off of how you are with your fellow authors and writers. So if you are known to write good stories or have a track record, or if you are someone that they like personally, then you're apt to be remembered when these type of anthologies come out. And the editor of the book, Eric S. Brown, who's a well-known horror author, has written both with big presses in New York City as well as small presses, mostly known for zombie and Bigfoot horror novels. I remembered some of the stories that I had written that he felt were pretty solid, so he contacted me and asked if I would want to submit a story or so, and that he would review and determine whether or not it would be something that could fit with the anthology. And so that's how I actually got involved through Eric S. Brown, who, by the way, is having some surgery this weekend, so well wishes to him. So that's it. But either way, that's how I got involved.
Were you a fan of the two Chud films?
I have never seen the second Chud film, specifically because I heard it was in different. It was more.
Campy.
It was by a different. Well, yeah, exactly. It was more of a campy film and didn't have the same tone as the original. The original I had seen about basically right before I started this podcast, Dark Discussion. So probably within 10 to 8 years ago, I started deciding to watch all the tentpole horror films that I had missed over the years. Being under 18, when a lot of those came out, I was unable to see them, and I wasn't able to bring them home from VHS stores like Blockbuster to watch, because we only had one TV with a VCR, and I wasn't going to be able to watch those in front of my parents. So I never really saw any of them. And then I decided to watch them all about 10 years ago. And as I started going through the main ones and finishing up them, I went to the secondary tier, or not lesser known but still tentpole type films, and Chud happened to be one of them. And I watched it, and I felt it was a solid science fiction horror film. I was actually surprised, because I thought it was going to be campy and silly, but it was actually played straight and well acted and well directed with pretty cool special effects. And then when the new Blu-ray came out recently, maybe a year and a half ago, I immediately snagged that, and so I'm most certainly a fan of the film. The lead actor and the producer actually just passed away, so rest in peace. But it just shows you how old the film is now.
Yeah, the first Chud film is very good. You're not missing much with the second one. It's more of a very campy film. It's one of those bad movies that you can't help but watch. But it's still a fun film.
I heard that came out on Blu-ray too. Do you have that Blu-ray?
Yes, I do. It was on the Vestron video label.
That's right. And the first one, I think, is Arrow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the way Arrow Video's been doing with the RJL Entertainment releases, because they've I think released that Reanimator. I think Vamp 2 was on there, part of them.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for Elvira to hit Blu-ray.
Yeah, Sir Films have not. And oddly, we both actually saw her at Scaricon, New England, and I did not ask her about that. Were you able to talk to her at all?
No, I totally forgot all about it.
Yeah,
when I was there.
Yeah, same here.
Because I kept hearing rumors of Blu-ray release here in the States. I know it's released in other parts of the world, but not here for some reason. But hoping for it.
Yep, absolutely. Eventually, they make it here sooner or later. It really just comes down to rights per nation, and if the states eventually get some company to do the rights, then we'll get it too.
Okay, now back to the Chud discussion. How did you come up with the story for the Deuce, and why did you make 42nd Street in New York a central part of it, the story?
Basically, even though a horror fan, I'm really more into gritty pulp fiction type stuff. So, for example, obviously Pulp Fiction by Quentin Tarantino would be a film that immediately would attract my attention, as well as all the follow-ups by other directors like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and Run, Lola, Run, and Doug Liman's Go, and so on and so forth. But a lot of that comes to the fact that I'm a big fan of 1970s cinema as well. So films like Taxi Driver and China Syndrome, and obviously the Godfather films and so forth, all like really were the first type of films that I had seen after going through Disney and things like that as a youngster. So for whatever reason, those films always attract my attention most, and I wanted to write a story that had that gritty feel of New York City in 1985, or when the movie Chud happened to take place. Basically, as you know, prior to Mayor Rudy Giuliani becoming mayor and cleaning up the city that he did and turning Times Square into the tourist attraction that it is now. Prior to that, it used to be a dirty, grimy, filthy place, a lot of pornography hookers, drug dealers, and whatnot. And my story takes place in the Deuce, which is the nickname for 42nd Street in Times Square at that time, which was coincidentally that TV show by HBO came out called The Deuce after I had written this story, but they had the same idea, which was the gritty time frame. And so I wanted to focus the story in a 1970s feel, even though it took place in 1985. And so that's the reason why I chose that as the setting for the story.
What was the writing process like while you were writing that story?
To be honest, I had a while to write it, but I took a long time to actually sit down and write it. So most of it was forming the story in my head and writing notes and so forth. A lot of times when I walk in the forest with my dog, when I drive long distances to places, I'm thinking about ideas for stories and whatnot. And so what happened was that I figured, since this is obviously Times Square during the time when it was dirty, what type of people would be there. So I figured, okay, there would be prostitutes, there would be the cheap greasy spoon diner that would be there, that would attract those type of people, as we would see where in the movie Taxi Driver, where Robert De Niro's character and Peter Boyle's character met. It was kind of a similar diner. Obviously a police officer would be around, and then a lot of diversity. So most of the characters in the story are of mixed ethnicities, Puerto Rican, black, Jewish, Korean, Polish immigrant, and whatnot. So that's how the characterizations began to form. And then, of course, I wanted the Chud story, and so then the Chud story just would focus around this diner and what happens in less than an hour during the middle of the morning, when a Chud epidemic was really just beginning, I guess.
Besides your story, what other stories should people check out in this anthology?
For me, the two that stick out the most, and I have the book right here in front of me, are, let me see here, I'm trying to find them now. Step 8 is one of them by Chud Lives. I was actually able to talk to him about the story, and it's a pretty solid one. And then we have a interesting one that actually comes from the perspective of someone from outside the United States, someone that brought a different perspective to a Chud epidemic called, the story's called All at Sea by Ross Baxter. He's a writer from the UK, Englishman, who basically has the Chud epidemic take place on sea, basically on a tanker type ship. So those are two of the standout ones for me. Some others, David Bernstein's story, Toxic Disposal, is pretty solid as well, among others. But I would say those three were probably the ones that I enjoyed the most.
Another thing that I noticed is that you're also part of the New England Horror Writers. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. Actually, that's pretty much how I met most of the people that I know through the author community. A lot of them are on Facebook. Basically, it's an organization that used to be part of what was called the Horror Writers Association, which still is in existence, but has no affiliation with the New England Horror Writers Association. But what it is an individual named Scott Goudswood is now the head of it, and basically he and a few others, they get tables at conventions in the northeast area of the country, and basically sell their work. So all these authors basically get together, sell their books, mostly either self-published or are from small press. And what happens is once a year or once every other year, depending on the time, they actually do have a horror anthology as well that they put out with from all New England authors. But the group is really just a support group and a way to get, I guess, camaraderie for writers in the New England area.
How can a writer in the New England area join the group?
Very simple. Just contact Scott Goudswood or the New England Horror Writers Association. Both are on Facebook, and as long as you are from New England, you can join. You don't even have to have anything published yet either. But you obviously want to get published, or you are already published. And that's pretty much the only criteria you need, which is New England and aspiring or published writer.
Do you have any writing projects in the pipeline?
Yeah, everybody does, to be honest, that likes to write or wants to write. It really just comes down to time and whether or not it will work. I have I actually have like 3 manuscripts in progress, various development, percentage done, and they all are something that I hope to finish. Again, though, it comes down to time. So I have one that is not really a horror, but more of a drama/thriller, and then I have a techno thriller and a horror one, and then actually I do have a 4th one that I'm writing too, which is a zombie themed one as well. So the one that's closest to being done is the drama thriller, but the one I probably should focus on the most is probably the zombie, because that may be the most easiest to get published by small press. So that's where I'm at now, and I do have a number of short stories that are finished or in progress that I hope to send out to various anthologies.
Where can they find your short stories?
Well, the easiest way to find them is to just go to Amazon.com. All the published there, you just type in my name and they'll pop up. One book that I have has 5 stories in it. It's called Pentagonal Sextet. Basically, it's 5 stories by 6 different authors, so each author has 5 different stories, so you get 30 stories, and 5 of them are by me. That is the one that has most of my tales, obviously, because there's 5. But I'm in another number of others. Another good one that has a short story by me is called Invocations. That has one story that is pretty good, in my opinion, really solid. And then Dark Passages 2, I think it's called, and that has another one that a reviewer actually stated was one of their favorites, so that was good. But I do have a few others, but all can be found through just searching for Philip C. Perron on Amazon. Or they could always contact Dark Discussions, and I can help them through that as well.
How can they find Dark Discussions on the web and social media?
Well, the easiest place to find us is just simply typing darkdiscussions.com. That's pretty easy to remember. And then at the bottom of every page of darkdiscussions.com are links to the Facebook group, to our email, to the places you can download the podcast besides at darkdiscussions.com, so like iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and whatnot. And then if they want to just directly go to Facebook, they can just type Dark Discussions Podcast, and that will bring up the Facebook group, and you can join that. And then, obviously, we're on Twitter and so forth. But darkdiscussions.com is the easiest place to go because the links to everything are right there, including all the 350 podcasts as well as the spin-off podcasts.
Well, thank you for your time, and I'm very happy for you letting me be on your network.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. I'm glad you are. I've been watching your YouTube videos for the past month or so that you've started, and you're solid what you have to say. So you're absolutely a great addition to the network, to be honest.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day.
All right, thank you.
Welcome back to Anthony T's Horror Show. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Philip Perron. Now I'm going to talk about on what you can expect inside Anthony T's Horror Chamber, both on my website and on YouTube. First, on the YouTube page, I'm planning on shooting another episode of the Horror Chambers DVD and Blu-ray collection. It should be out hopefully by the end of next week, if not sooner. Depends when this episode airs. It could already be out. And I'll also probably have another quick review on the YouTube channel along with some more trailers from upcoming horror films that you can check out. Remember, you can subscribe to Anthony T's Horror Chamber on YouTube by going to the YouTube search box and typing in Anthony T's Horror Chamber, as yours truly does not have an address for it yet, as you have to pretty much have a number of subscribers before you can get a custom address, which quite frankly sucks, but what can you do? On the website, you can check out my review of Puppet Master: The Littlest Reich. That will definitely be up there by the time this episode airs, hopefully, as it'll be out on Friday. By the time you're listening to this, it's already out on VOD. I will be doing a review of that. I can't wait to do a review of this film, as I'm really looking forward to this film, because I'm a very big fan of the Puppet Master series. Even though I'm a little skittish about this one, because from what I've heard, it's very different and very insane. So I can't wait to check this film out and have a review of that film up on the website. You can find my reviews over at the horrorchamber.blogspot.com. And now, here's my film recommendation to wrap up this first episode. For my first film recommendation on this show, I'm going to go back to the basis of how I came up with the title of this show, Anthony T's Horror Show, and it is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. The original one, not the TV remake. What I liked about the Rocky Horror Picture Show is that film is fun. Whether the film has its musical numbers to how some of the dialogue was written, it really has that midnight movie feel to it that really makes you want to check your brain at the door and just have a fucking good time. This film also has a very good lead performance from Tim Curry. Susan Sarandon was also great in this film, as well as Barry Bostwick. This film is a film that I always will see, no matter what. Whether it's in a shadow cast, whether it's at home, wherever. Anytime that film is playing, I will see this film. Because I always have a fun time enjoying what's going on. And I always love to do the time warp. I hope you enjoyed the first episode of the Anthony T's Horror Show. I hope to have an episode up every 2 weeks. And I hope to at least have 2 episodes up a month here on Doc Discussions. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. Have a good day and support indie horror.